I think a lot of it is a personal journey. For me, I think when I really understood that I'm the only person who has to live with myself, I had no other choice than to start moving into radical acceptance. I fought really hard when I felt like I couldn't hack it in the ICU because of my biological sleep need. And that was a very difficult time because up until that point, I felt I was doing well.
Welcome to Roots of Healing, the podcast where we uncover the insights and visionary ideas of physicians shaping the future of medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Siri Chand Khalsa. I'm an internist and board certified in lifestyle and integrative medicine, and I'm an advocate for holistic healing and embodied living. Before we begin, please note this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. The views expressed by our guests are their own and don't constitute medical advice. Please check in and consult with your healthcare team for personal medical concerns. Now, as you know, each week I have the privilege of sitting down with thought leaders, trailblazers who are reimagining what it means to heal body, mind, and spirit. And we explore their journeys, innovative approaches, and the deeper roots of healing that inspire us all. This week, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Audrey Wells. She's a seasoned sleep medicine physician, and we know that matters because addressing sleep concerns is no small endeavor. She's also a professional mindset coach, and she's on a mission to help people with insomnia and sleep apnea get fully treated without sacrificing comfort. And so I'm delighted, Dr. Wells, to welcome you to the podcast.
It's so nice to be here. I love your mission.
Thank you so much. So one of the things that I want to just jump right into is tell us a little bit about your career journey, where you, even if you want to go back to what was the moment you thought, maybe I'll be a doctor, and kind of lead us through, because we have some young trainees and even some pre-med folks that listen in. So tell us a little bit about what was it like when, and we're close in age, I believe, it was starting to be more 50-50 in med schools, but, we're still part of a generation that wasn't nurtured by a female generation above us. So I imagine most of your training process was predicated by the perspectives of men in the attending level. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, it was not clear to me what I wanted to do when I finished college. I had put myself through college doing research and kind of saw some disgruntled postdocs and thought that's not really for me. But there's no physicians in my family, so I was a little tentative about the whole field of medicine. And I ended up taking a couple of years off to work after college. I moved out to Boston. I worked at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute and just had a great experience there and interfaced with a lot of physicians. One in particular stands out. She was very confident, just kind of like the person that I wanted to be and, really maximizing her potential. So I would say she inspired me to go ahead and pull the trigger and go to med school. And, fast forward a number of years, I actually went through a pediatrics program, and then I was in my pediatrics pulmonary fellowship. And at my institution, it was really heavy on ICU training because at that time, it was the largest pediatric lung transplant center in the United States. And I loved the ICU. It was just the complexity, the patients, the problems, all of it really appealed to me. But the problem for me biologically was I was bumping up against my limit for what I can do taking call and being sleep deprived. I mean, if I'm honest, it was just really going against my grain. And I've heard that from a number of trainees, even now that there's the work hour limits in place and things. It's just a really demanding and challenging time. And so naturally I became interested in sleep. Like, why, why am I having this limitation and how can I overcome it? Ultimately, I ended up doing another fellowship in sleep medicine and then another fellowship in obesity medicine. So, I have kind of the bases covered when it comes to whole person care for sleep and energy management, which incorporates the eating piece. And this is really in line with what I believe as a person and health. And, it's just a really great way to practice. And so I'm very much passionate about what I do. And I like to educate. I like to think outside the box. And I like to look at the whole person when I talk to them and hear their story and make recommendations. So that's kind of how I came to be in sleep. During the pandemic, I think like many people, I'm like, oh, is this really what I want to do? Is just see one patient after another. And, I remember having a backlog in our institution of like thousands of people. And I was super unhappy with no continuity. And I felt like, the administration was breathing down my neck with trying to squeeze more RVUs out of me. And it was not fun. It was not a good way to practice. So I decided to go rogue. I decided to do something completely different. And I've been doing it for about 3 years now. And what that looks like is I have an online practice, basically for education, support, and community for people who have sleep apnea and insomnia. And, it's really bringing my medical expertise and my coaching to people to give them better access to care. And then on the side, I coach individuals, typically high performers, a lot of physicians who, like me, are wondering, how to squeeze the most out of life, how to make the most out of their daytime energy and sleep and return to that natural pleasure of sleep. And so it's all been just super fun. I feel like I'm getting to my ikigai and really proud of what I've been able to accomplish with that.
That's an incredible journey. Thanks for sharing. There's so many points to jump off from there. I'm curious. So are you able, when you do, this is super, just me curious, when you do sleep medicine, can you do adults and kids afterwards, basically? So you're not obliged to stay in the pediatric lane?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the answer is yes. With my pediatrics background, I was able to see a lot of kids, but for about 8 years or so, I practiced in the Southwest. I was the chief medical officer of a pretty large sleep medicine facility, and most of the patients I saw were adults. And my pediatrics friends make fun of me for this because, their adults come with adult problems. But I think the common thread is when you are sleep deprived, your frontal lobes kind of go offline and you end up looking very much like a child, a toddler even, and having those, drives, those hedonistic motivations to get all the dopamine. And so I think my pediatrics training very much applies to what I'm doing. And I enjoy adults very much. I like interacting with them. But yeah, it was a little bit of a crossover move to start seeing big people.
And I think just worth bringing awareness to that, to people who may find themselves at a certain crossroads thinking, maybe I'd like to explore a different patient population. This could be an interesting doorway without a second residency. I also took a couple years off, but still did not train when there were no work hours. So I trained without work hours. And I trained at Mayo Clinic, and it was one of the bigger liver transplants, the one in Jacksonville.
Okay.
So we had very intensive ICU rotations. And I remember distinctly, I don't know that I've ever told this story. I was driving home one day and fell asleep on the road. And Mayo, did you train in the Mayo system? Just being in Minnesota, you weren't part of.
Small, but no, not done.
They had back in the early 2000s, they had these interesting pagers that had a quality where they would go off and you had to call in quickly to get, the way the pagers worked is it was basically like an elaborate phone system. So they would call your pager, then you had to pull over or whatever, and you only had a certain window before the phone just sort of stopped ringing. And if you're on ICU, you don't want the nurse trying to track someone down because maybe you've made a mistake. God willing, someone's looking out for you. You don't want someone else to. So there was this vigilance for these pagers going off. But I was driving home, I fell asleep, and the pager went off and woke me up. And I was off the road. I was into the island. I was so sleep deprived. And so I think that a lot of physicians, and it sounds like you're doing coaching of physicians as well, have completely underestimated the trauma and impact that our rotations and schedules from early training, and even that pager sound, like when the dishwasher goes or certain things go, I'm like, exhale, like the beeper it's not beeping for you anymore. And I'm curious, tell me a little bit about what your insights have been specifically working with, let's say, women in medicine who are very attuned to caring deeply and perhaps losing sleep over, being woken up in the night and not being able to fall back asleep, or they carry a certain patterning, if you will, from those early training days where there was just a lot of hypervigilance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really insightful because most of the coaching I do is for women who have trouble with getting to sleep or middle of the night awakenings that end up being very prolonged. And when you look at a population of women as a whole, women are sort of conditioned to be vigilant, to scan and look and optimize and be aware. And so when you wake up in the middle of the night and it's dark and quiet and you're just alone with your thoughts, your mind can really go to some dark places, some scary places, catastrophizing, looking ahead and worrying about the future, looking in the past and kind of wanting to replaying things. So, I think with medicine, it's a lot that can get amplified because the stakes are raised. Being in the ICU, as you remember, like every decision you make has like a tie to some outcome. And so being very careful, being very deliberate with that is something that's necessary. And if you layer sleep deprivation onto it, there's like this emotional component that comes with. Sometimes I make the analogy like your frontal lobes are wrapped around your emotional center, your hippocampus and your limbic system, right? But when you lose sleep, your frontal lobes get very leaky. And so that inhibition they normally have over your emotional center gets leaky and your emotional brain comes out to play. So then, that can interfere with decision making, with critical thinking, and it can also create this residue of mental load after the day is done. And so frequently I'm working with people to manage that, sometimes manage it in the moment, but also set themselves up to deal with it better during the daytime. And a lot of what that involves is becoming aware of your own dialogue running, which can question your decisions and really create sort of this inner critic that's out of control. And it's tough. I'm not being a man, I don't know if men do this, but my sense is it's not the degree and the frequency that women experience. And it's part of our socialization. It's part of our culturization. And it's like, I think in some sense it benefits us. A friend of mine, and I talk a lot about this, because I would say both of us experienced some trauma in medical school, and it's a common situation, but people don't talk about it a lot because there's, you're supposed to be tough all the time and like, oh, I'm tough and I can handle this. And I think that gets you through. It's a coping mechanism. However, it's at some degree of personal sacrifice, and recovering from that is some work that needs attention. Sometimes after training, sometimes during training. And I really try to make people aware of that because their inner dialogue tends to be quite stringent on what they perceive the standard to be. And it's not necessarily a humanistic standard, is it? It's actually, we're not allowed to have bodies. We're not allowed to have sick days or even mental health days. So challenging that is something that I hope that I help people to do.
I call it the great unlearning. That's in its own way a decolonization from the culture that we were nurtured in. And the reason I know this so well is that I had what I like to call the COVID wake up. And in now 5 years, February of 2020, I had whatever variant was the first one through and got very, very sick and ceased being able to sleep after that. And the sleep, I tell people like what COVID did to my sleep architecture was so bizarre. And I don't think I've ever talked about this, but it precipitated almost like a premature ovarian failure for me. So I went right into menopause and then long COVID. And that was like this really crazy perfect storm for not sleeping for like a year. And I think it's so fascinating because then I had to heal. Mm-hmm. And I was already kind of a person all in for healing. Like I've been doing integrative medicine and lifestyle and very out of the box thinker through my whole career. And I always tell people it was that basis that gave me the ability to find out of the box solutions for my insomnia. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, I would probably be, which is appropriate for some people, down a very different pathway of how it was managed because it was like profound insomnia. And it made my cognition really weird. And I really haven't been back into clinical medicine since then because I always tell people it was like a Rolodex. I'd be like, ACE inhibitor. Okay, what is the name of the medicine? It's like you're moving this Rolodex and eventually the word finding would land on the right, lisinopril, but it would take like 3 to 5 seconds. And you're like, where are you up there? So I have a very personal relationship to what you're talking about. So I don't want to be too emotional on the podcast, but like, whoo, do I know what the middle of the night critic looks like? And
totally. And the thing is, your brain in the middle of the night is different than your brain at 10 o'clock in the morning. And once I kind of explain that to people, I think it's possible to loosen the grip on those crazy thoughts that come up in the middle of the night and kind of distance yourself from that. The negativity bias is incredible. And if you get into a place where you feel threatened on some level, I like to say, the thoughts that go through your mind are not enough, not safe, or not congruent. And so if you get into one of those themes and your brain is bouncing around, you're basically under threat and it's incompatible with getting back to sleep. I went through a tough period in my life, and it was when I was practicing sleep medicine. So the irony of having terrible insomnia while, presenting as a sleep expert during the day was not lost on me.
Right.
But because I had that experience and I had, like you, to kind of fight through and see what works, what doesn't work, I feel like now I'm street smart about sleep medicine, and I'm also book smart about sleep medicine. So it was really something that I treasure now, because I think it makes me a better doctor. But it sort of underscores how critically important sleep is to self-care. When you lose it, then you start to become frayed. And so I really commend you for going through that. And now, these folks who had long COVID or have long COVID, there's probably a sleep disorder component attached to that. And
100%.
yeah.
I always tell people I'm like a living COVID laboratory, because I have the weirdest array of symptoms. And anyway, I went to the long COVID clinic in Rochester and finally had some better understanding, but we really don't understand it well. So it has sort of, and I tell people, I was like, there's never a silver lining. I mean, maybe I say that, but like, it was merely an invitation. I would never ask someone else to go through what I went through, because it was miserable. Like, I would prefer not to be street smart about COVID, about what a huge career change looks like, about really applying lifestyle and self-care for ourselves as clinicians, which is now this little pet project I have, or big project, you might say, because there was that invitation to me. I would have preferred the bonbons by the pool route, which is, it's all copacetic. And today I am finishing the day and I have my normal paycheck, and I'm going to this conference, and I have my colleagues that I see at work, and I have my favorite specialists I refer to. I am not in that universe at all, and most likely never will be again. And I don't characterize myself as someone with a disability, but in a lot of ways, I could have claimed a disability policy if I'd had one, because I really was unable to cognitively pull in the things I needed. And it was the emotional pieces. And I really would love to hear how you see this. So we know sleep is a biological need, but tell me what you mean by sleep is an emotional experience. I have a lot I could say about that, but I would love to hear your perspectives, and tell us a little bit about, in that context, I'd love to hear a little bit about what your intake looks like when you were practicing. And we're not intake for me, of course, but like, what were because you're an out of the box thinker, what were some of the questions you asked people that other people maybe didn't or wouldn't think to ask?
Yeah. I'm going to start with that, because I think it circles back to sleep is an emotional experience. Insomnia is so common, so prevalent, and people move in and out of insomnia. And then you have people like lifers, right? People who've said, I've tried everything, I've been dealing with this for years, and they kind of resign themselves to live a life that's a little dimmer because they have this ongoing sleep problem. And, I was trained in cognitive behavioral therapy. I delivered cognitive behavioral therapy, and I was always really unhappy with cognitive behavioral therapy, because I felt like, nobody wants to really engage with sleep restriction for a long period of time. And then the stimulus control aspect of it was also, it just fell flat for a lot of people. And it just didn't seem like I was being really effective for a certain endotype of person. And so I started, kind of looking at different things. And I realized eventually what was missing. So with cognitive behavioral therapy, you're missing the middle piece, which is your feelings, your emotions that you're lying in bed with. So I can address, how people think, and I can get them to do behaviors that make sleep more likely. But the unspoken part of it is you're just lying in bed marinating in your emotions. And quite simply, there are emotions incompatible with sleep. They are high amplitude emotions. They're often negative emotions, but can be positive too. And so when I started looking at sleep through that lens, I was able to connect better with the people that before I didn't feel effective with. And so I literally have a list of emotions that are sleep promoting. And some of what I do is help people to become more emotionally literate or descriptive. And for many female physicians, this is difficult, again, because you kind of stuff things down in order to get it done. And so when you're lying in bed, you want to be up in your brain because that's comfortable, or you want to grab your phone and check out looking for the dopamine hits. But if you are more emotionally literate, then you can start to get in the driver's seat again and choose the feelings that are going to allow you to sleep. They're kind of like gateways: low amplitude, neutral to slightly positive emotions, and then develop that with the cognitive processes that lead to that emotion. And then, of course, the outcome you're always looking for is being relaxed enough to fall asleep. So taking that framework, I started having more success with people who tend to be up in their heads a lot, kind of high achievers, high internal drive, and people who had trauma, unprocessed trauma. And it's so, so common. I feel like it's not talked about enough. And with sleep, deprivation will make your trauma experience worse. So kind of pulling back the layers to help create safety in sleep can really make for a good drug-free result. So that's a long answer to your question, but that's kind of the concept of the emotional gateway to sleep.
That's incredible. And I have to say that we did not learn that. So for those of you that are listening, for whom this seems very common sense, please understand that in the map of our training, it's like the homunculus of thought and the tiny big toe of feelings. This is massive arc of work we do cognitively, mentally, thoughtfully, yet we are feeling beings. In fact, perhaps even more so than some of the general public because of our nature and desire to serve and be present with suffering. And so this idea, and for those that have listened to the podcast, you've probably heard my story, but I remember the time that I decided to stop feeling in my residency because it was very inconvenient to rounds. And there was a group of us, again, in this very high acuity ICU, and someone was dying, and the granddaughter came in to sing Amazing Grace. And of course, who can keep a dry eye in Amazing Grace? 3 rounding ICU physicians can, except for me. And I was like a faucet, and it was my patient. And I was probably a second or third year. And I developed vasovagal syncope after rounding because they were like, buckle up, buttercup, please stop, please. There's no crying in baseball, right? There's no crying on rounds. And I was just merely being present to the miracle of life leaving form, right? This is this incredible, intense moment when our last breath happens. And I ultimately worked in hospice for 4 or 5 years because there was probably some reconciliation with being able to be present with that moment. Also, me just having a hard time meshing with classic primary care practices as an internist and not wanting to be in the hospital for all those reasons we're discussing. But I think it's incredible that you've really keyed into the somatic elements of emotions. Like, where in the body are we feeling things? Like, it's not just letting the emotions exist here. It's like letting there be a whole body experience of an emotion. And I think that's amazing. What kind of results do people get when you give them permission to do that? Tell us a little bit about what kind of transformations you see.
More commonly than not, I think there's a great deal of like, really though, like, I don't know, but not for me, skepticism and side eye. Um, Again, because, we've really been conditioned and rewarded for stuffing things down. I mean, like you, I remember when I realized I got to go numb inside. It was the first time I ever did chest compressions on a baby. It was in the NICU. And I threw up afterwards because I was like, this is like so not right. It does not make sense. And then I was like, I cannot be there while I'm doing that. And it served me well in that situation. But, at some point it just becomes too comfortable. And so kind of healing back and pulling back from that takes some work. So yeah, I mean, there's the initial skepticism. I think then there's this relief, like, oh, someone sees me and someone understands, like that internal dialogue, that chatter, that self-critique, and has given me permission to challenge that or to defend myself against that, to create a place for me to be a person. There's lots of stories about docs and how we should be incredibly resilient. And, there's a lot of controversy about the work limitation hours. And one of my favorite stories is about the guy who was like one of the fathers of medicine, being high on cocaine and challenging all of his subordinates really to be in the hospital as long as he was. And that's kind of set the tone for decades afterwards. And we still do that now. But there's just no gold medal. There's no benefit to a person to throw themselves under the bus. And so starting to practice that self-advocacy, not just for your sleep, but also for everything related to being a person and having good self-care, I think is really helpful.
Yeah, I love how you've really had your own internal ownership of what that looks like for your career, because that's really off the beaten track. And I want to sort of talk a little bit about, was there a moment you were sitting in your sort of more clinically standard pathway where you were like, just not another minute am I doing this? Was it a black and white moment for you, or was it kind of a gradual off ramp?
I would say it's more the latter. Yeah, I mean, I was in a leadership role, I was chief medical officer. So I had a lot of agency over the clinic that I ran. It was a private practice clinic. We ran lean. We did good work. I was super proud of helping people. And then, we had a move. I was coming off of my maternity leave with my first child, and I went to work for a pretty large health system with pretty large health system problems. And, on the one hand, I was just trying to tolerate the work to bring in a paycheck and to kind of practice what I had been taught and like what my expertise was. But then it started to bother me, like the RVU pressure and the insurance really having a seat inside the clinic room, dictating what I could and couldn't order for my patient, and the whole prior authorization mess, and no continuity with the patients that I liked. And it was really a lot of sort of accumulation of this unhappiness, this dissatisfaction. And then I was finally like, I can't do this anymore. It's starting to infringe on my integrity. And when it starts keeping me up at night, then I'm like, oh no, not this sleep doc. So so working on a big change was a long time coming, but I think it needed to be deliberate because I'm not that spontaneous. And it required a lot of bravery on my part, if I'm honest, because I didn't have a template, and that's not the way we're used to being as docs. I mean, you just kind of plod along and follow the steps. But yeah, it was a long time, a big off ramp.
And it's interesting because that the courage to kind of honor the inner voice is part of the, to me, the undoing of insomnia. Because sometimes there's a whisper that's waking us up at night and saying, have you thought about what about? And I love what you're saying, because it makes me think that there's actually some nuggets of truth in what's coming through at 3:30 and 4 a.m., but the brain that we're using to process it at that time doesn't elevate us. It doesn't give us courage or hope or joy in the questions. It really is like a descending energy. But there are some truths in it when we start really honoring deeply the invitations that are arriving.
Yeah. And sometimes it's really useful to capture that. So for middle of the night awakenings, that's why I have this idea, not enough, not safe, not congruent. That not congruent piece, that not in alignment, my head says something, my heart says something else.
Mm.
If you capture that in the middle of the night and then look at it the next day, and even keep track of how often that theme comes up, I think you're exactly right. I think there's a nudge there from a part of us that normally doesn't get a voice during the day.
It is fascinating. In my own sort of training journey, I took 3 years off to study Ayurveda, which is the traditional healing system of India, in Albuquerque with Dr. Vasant Lad. And so, yeah, we probably met in a cafe 7 years ago, 10 years ago. I was there 2011 to 13. And in the Ayurvedic tradition, there's a notion, Brahma Muhurta, which is the sacred time of the night, but it's pre-dawn hours where the sages and saints would meditate. That's why I thought of it, because of those teachings. And so that whisper that comes in that time, if we engage in pranayama, breath work, mindfulness, meditation, really can lead the soul or into this these are sort of spiritual terms, but like this dharmic living, like deeper alignment. But we don't really have a culture of morning practices in the West. And I had spent, after all my medical years, I spent many years in spiritual communities up very early meditating prior to my COVID experience. And so I had this very weird juxtaposition of issues when it happened, because I had sort of reached an impasse of what I wanted to do between 3 and 6 in the morning meditatively. I was ready to sleep again. And, that's a story for another podcast. But I think it's so fascinating to think about stages of sleep and awareness, and this not congruent piece that you're bringing forward is so wise, because these ancient traditions had a knowingness of what being awake at 4 could offer you if you happen to be awake. Now, maybe this was someone who couldn't sleep and this was their algorithm for moving through it, but all the same, it's such a fascinating idea to think about what being in congruency means for people. I'm curious, did you pull that through from your coaching training or work? Tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that. Let's go a little more deep into that concept, because that's got a lot of really cool stuff around it, I think.
Yeah. Yes. And I think, honestly, I think coaching has made me woke in a different way. I mean, I always kind of resented the fact that as a sleep doctor, I didn't feel like I was limited to just the night. I wanted to also help people manage their consciousness level during the daytime. And so this idea that you kind of go in and out different degrees of consciousness is very interesting to me. And to your point with these middle of the night awakenings, that used to happen routinely when, we didn't have electricity, and there's this concept of the second sleep in literature. And something that's really interesting about that is, you wake up in the middle of the night, which is not necessarily abnormal. And you can have these quiet activities, and you can do kind of explore your own brain. When you go back to sleep, more than likely, you're going to have a period of REM sleep or dream sleep. Because as human beings, we have this rhythm whereby REM sleep becomes longer and more prominent in the second half of the night. And one of the most important features of REM sleep is this emotional processing. So we do we achieve emotional regulation through REM because REM allows us to play out all of these stimuli that our brain gets on a virtual reality system within our own brain. And so people who are REM deprived or have disorders that selectively make their REM worse or less tend to have emotional dysregulation during the day. So it's just something to chew on. But through coaching, when I would talk to people about middle of the night awakenings, which, honestly, if I had a magic wand and I could wave it on one thing, that would be it, because middle of the night awakenings are just like the bane of my existence. Yeah, everybody experiences it. And the tricky part is if you've already satisfied your sleep need in the first few hours, then you just don't have that drive to get back to sleep. So when I would talk to people about that and start helping them work through it, what can you do? How can you respond or not respond? What's going to work for you? I just noticed these themes that would come up. And that's how I arrived at, the trifecta: not enough, not safe, not congruent. And so when you're able to kind of slot your monkey mind into one of those themes, it's kind of a comfort measure, because name it to tame it is real, right? So then you have something that you can start to work on. And you kind of have also this feeling that it's a finite problem. If you don't take the time to define it, it starts to seem out of control, like this is never going to get better. But if you realize my brain only has a handful of themes that it throws up in the middle of the night to make me crazy, then you start to realize, I'm kind of on to myself now. Anyway, one of the antidotes that I work out with people is, if you're really struggling, just get up, do a brain dump onto paper. The writing helps to slow your mind down. It helps to just kind of evacuate your brain. And sometimes that's all it takes to feel seen, soothed, safe, go back to sleep. But if you're still feeling agitated, the next step is to look at what you've written. Don't censor yourself. Don't worry about grammar or punctuation, but look at what you've written and sort of highlight what you have control over. And it ends up being very small because your brain is conjecturing, right? So very few things we have control over. And then what can you do about it right now? And that's almost always zero. But you can make a little plan or revisit it during the day and realize if this happens, then X, Y, Z, I can do that. So all of this to say that, you're basically shining a light on what your brain's doing and then figuring it out. And it's a personalized process. But there were just these themes that would come up, and I realized that we're all pretty much going through the same experience.
Wow, that is so profound. I love the courage you've brought to that inquiry, because I am just excited for everybody in your cohorts, in your groups, because I imagine they're having literally life-changing insight. And I have to say that a lot of the women who the physicians I've had on the podcast, live in a lane like this, where they're really innovative, and they are creating sort of N of one, but not irresponsibly, because they're mid to late stage career physicians. So they're not new kids on the block. They have a lot of ethics that drive how they create the, maybe we'll say, containers that this knowledge lives in, and the support that's provided there is extremely transformative, but not diagnosing and treating in the same vein, right? It's this very interesting other place where coaching lives. And I think that some of us were explicitly designed for this, to not be in those models anymore, and to be innovating and to be exploring somewhat based on our own experience, then going into literature and saying, what can I find that supports what I'm observing? So we're the N of one within our own lives. And then we're like, wow, this study in Italy affirms that these three things, when done in unison, create that new phenomena of sleep. So if someone was moving through these processes, tell us a little bit about what that looks like in this coaching model. So I'm just curious, like, how does someone interact with this model? Do they come in for a period of time? Do they get some one-to-one? Is it some group work? Are there recorded things, prompts? How have you kind of, and don't give us all your trade secrets, of course, but we want to keep that inside your intellectual property, but just give us a sense of what that experience might be like.
Yeah. I would say, I've played around with different time periods. One thing I always sort of bump up against is by the time people want to talk to somebody like me, they have really had it with what they're going through. And it creates a level of impatience that I could never satisfy. So I'm usually really upfront with people, like, this is not going to go as fast as you want it to go. And sleep is just like that. It's, and I think a lot of sort of natural pleasures are like that. There's a delayed gratification element, but it's laying down work that's going to serve you for the long term. And in that regard, I think it's very valuable, the time I spend with people. And what I've settled on is about a 12-week stint. There's a cadence really that develops. So mostly after like 4 or 5 weeks, there's significant improvement, not just in sleep quality, but also wake quality as well. And then we have our first fight. And then it's like after that, just really locking in skills, fine tuning, and launching after that. And then I usually do a year check-in with the clients that I've seen, because sometimes like weight loss, for example, you just need a measure after a period to find out where you're at. But the skills that I've taught tend to be quite durable and also translate well into stress management and ingraining other habits like exercise or, eating unprocessed food and other things. So it's, I think, really valuable work, but it's not quick. And that's okay.
Yeah. In fact, my Ayurveda teacher said that again and again, that when you're going into the daily routine, he said, it's not a quick fix. The body needs these. It'd be so interesting. This is just me thinking, but like, it'd be so interesting to look at a rhythm to circadian rhythm, in so much as you need to see 100 cycles of a circadian rhythm for a new pattern to exist in the brain? Or is it 60 or is it 40 that you can see these, like you finally start to see hormone levels slightly different and melatonin levels slightly different and cortisol levels slightly different and sex hormones slightly different. And
yeah,
that would be so fascinating, because you're seeing the results, which tells us they're predicated on neurohormonal pathways more than likely. So what are the biological drivers of that? That would be really cool to see that kind of data in a coaching, like the model you've created, which is really very holistic and humanistic.
Yeah.
Are you gathering any data? Probably it's not as relevant.
Yeah, that would be great. It makes me think of one summer I worked in a lab. It was a lab that studied sleep with a cat model. And part of what I would do is a surgical procedure that allowed us to use an electrode put in the cat's brain to sample CSF and run it through the HPLC and find out what was going on. It's not there. And in a way, there's so many levers pulling on our consciousness, sleep and wake. I liken it to instruments in a symphony, and like when things aren't going well, it's just terrible and loud. But once everything lines up and plays at the right tone, then you get beautiful music. So it has a little bit to do with where a person starts. I will say that I always keep my fingers on the pulse of technology, and sleep tech coming out right now is really exciting. And I can't wait to put some of these neuromodulator devices in place. I think that's really going to help accelerate people's experience of sleep and moving more toward a parasympathetic state. So TBD, but I think that's going to be something that will really accelerate things in the near future.
Those will be particular wearables or just how the data is managed?
Yeah, both. I think, there's some interesting applications for AI in lab sleep studies and home sleep apnea tests, because we capture so much data second by second. Consumer wearable devices have been doing this for a while already. And then there are wearable neuromodulator devices that they do different things, but it's so close to, really becoming tech that can move the needle for people.
I tried Neurofit or something. It goes on it was like a little stimulator for the autonomic.
Was it an Apollo?
Yes, it was an Apollo. I couldn't remember the name, but yes, that Dave Rubin yeah. So we're not endorsing it, of course, to our listeners, but this is what I tried. And
I haven't tried that one yet.
Yeah,
I've had people who tell me it's good.
Yeah, it's so unique, just like all things in medicine. Well, I'm so grateful for the time we've had. And as we wind down, I'd love to hear, grappling with your own sleep apnea / insomnia and sort of this passage through imposter syndrome in that, like, how did you move through that? Like, what were some thoughts and ideas that you gave yourself that gave yourself permission to be human, as you said at the beginning of the podcast? Because I think as clinicians, we often bypass, I got so sick I couldn't do it anymore, but dang, I was really good at it for a long time.
Yeah. It's a good question. I think a lot of it is a personal journey. For me, I think when I really understood that I'm the only person who has to live with myself, I had no other choice than to start moving into radical acceptance. Like, I fought really hard when I felt like I couldn't hack it in the ICU because of my biological sleep need. And that was a very difficult time because up until that point, I felt I was doing well. But in the end, I think the more adversity that you learn to move through, the more flexible you become. And that is so valuable. So I've kind of relaxed into myself, and it's so much nicer.
I love that. Let me, my window, I got a little dog yipping away. I don't know. I'm going to have to send my husband out there to check on that dog. This is not normally a dog yipping in our backyard. So, but I think that there's so much to be said for letting us have our journey, but still embracing our excellence and our expertise. And this is something I think that's so fun about the shift out of the classic model, which requires perfection, is that we can move to precision, but away from perfection. And because in the coaching model and in the integrative model, we have 80 tools, and our biggest mistake is telling someone all of them at once. And
Yeah.
I've got like 100 things that's going to help you. And
Yeah.
they walk out glassy-eyed and think, that was really cool. She knew so much, but I need more space and I need a little bit less at once. And so we can really let go of the perfection that was so required, the vent settings, the drip settings, the triple, double, quadruple checkings. I used to do that in the ICU. I'd look at it 10 times because I was handwriting orders. I don't know exactly where.
Oh, yeah. I was there too.
So, I mean, back in the old days when we walked uphill both ways, we hand wrote ICU drip orders, and the pharmacist would be with their calculator coming after you. And then the person making the drips would double check it a third time. And now, of course, all that's automated and pre-mixed and all in all. But I do think that the advent of AI is going to give us very particular windows that are looking at large bodies of data about an individual. And I have a personal bias that the tricorder is not that far off.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like fantastic science fiction, but of course, we don't have flying cars yet, but most everything else in the Jetsons has nearly come to pass, except for these kind of very interesting pieces around monitoring and comprehensively understanding. And I think really that's what a tricorder is AI saying, give me as much data as possible. And in a microsecond, I'm going to give you an elaborate pattern recognition pattern, like a setting. What do you think has surprised you the most? We could probably have 4 podcasts because I think sleep is actually one of the most fascinating things. But along your studies, and you've probably shared a lot of them, but are there any we haven't talked about as we're wrapping up that really surprised you about sleep and wakefulness that you would love to share, that you were like, wow, that is interesting data, or that's an interesting concept, or something you came across just in your work that really was, I don't want to say shocking because I have a feeling it's hard to shock you, but something that was revealing or interesting.
Yeah. I'll say a couple of things. One is I've always been fascinated with dreams and dream architecture and the recall of dreams or not. And I think that's got great potential for like a whole other level of VR, and possibly AI as well. And then kind of along in the same lines, the brain is an incredible organ. It's the most important thing we have. And the brain absolutely needs sleep. It's almost as important as wake, if not more important, ironically. And I think we've really only just scratched the surface of what happens when we've got our eyes closed and we're unconscious, especially for women. I think women sleep differently on a number of levels. And I hope I get to see some breakthroughs with that during my lifetime. I regularly feel that we're missing something significant with women.
I believe it. I wholeheartedly 100% believe it. Yeah, we didn't talk much about dreams, and boy, that is a really fun topic. I imagine you see people with all kinds. I have to ask this question and then we'll finish. Sorry. I imagine you're seeing people who have tried many different avenues of treatment, and including psychedelics. And I'm wondering if you're seeing support with some of the things you're talking about for people that have tried some of these. Let's really shift how the brain, body, spirit, mind continuum is functioning with a psychedelic. Perhaps it's not a wise application, or perhaps they've done it in a very supportive and appropriate container. I'm just curious if you've seen changes in sleep with people who've explored that prior to you. And it doesn't sound like you're incorporating that at all, but I'm just curious how that has shown up for people coming to you and what you think about it.
Yeah, numbers are very low at this point because I think it's still really new. I've got some personal experience with that, and I'm pro psychedelic. There are some that have effects on sleep. For example, ketamine reduces REM sleep, increases non-REM, and it seems that in younger people, the non-REM that's increased is slow wave deep sleep, which has some good advantages. Um, I'm excited about what's coming up in terms of psychedelic treatments because it's another way to kind of think outside the box. And even before learning about the different options, I was familiar with this concept of the default mode network. And that's something that is less and less in operation as our dependence on screens increases. So there's like this interplay there that happens. And then psychedelics like psilocybin really kind of throw up all of the cards and then let them fall in a more sort of healthier pattern, allow us to create new grooves in our brain. And I think that's really helpful for sleep. Typically, it's associated with a minor sleep disruption. And to your point, the container, the before care, and the integration afterwards are all really critical. So, appropriately administered, I think psychedelics have a lot of potential.
That's exciting. I think a lot of people who think outside the box share your perspectives on that, especially if you've been in medicine long enough to see things that are very recalcitrant to every other intervention. And we see such profound suffering in the veterans and sometimes in end of life where the initial studies have been so. I haven't done the deep dive on the literature, but it does fascinate me to see how between psychedelics, AI, and these integration of whole person healing systems like Ayurveda and traditional Chinese medicine, like how are all these containers going to be intersecting more and more that will give us really more illuminated perspectives on what promotes longevity, what promotes health, and how that all comes together. Tell us a little bit how people can find you and what sort of ways they could connect with you.
Sure. I have two websites. One is Super Sleep MD, and that's for people who struggle with sleep apnea and insomnia. I have some online courses there, and I do one-on-one consultations periodically. And then my other website is A Wells MD, and that's for one-on-one coaching for high achievers and people with busy brains that want to be more productive and sleep better. So I usually offer an initial consultation to evaluate for fit and describe my program, and then we proceed as needed. But the work that I'm doing right now is super gratifying to me. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you about it. I'm very passionate. I hope that comes through. And I really am cheering you on with your mission as well.
Oh, I have the feeling this is the first of many conversations in different places now that we have a personality and a story and a being behind the photos and one-liners that we see on social media. As I sort of alluded to at the beginning, getting these conversations with people have been really meaningful for me because there are more of us than we realize who are really doing really innovative things. And I'm excited that we all get to hear and learn a little bit more about each other and send people to each other's various offerings. And by the time I'm done with this podcast, I don't imagine I'll do it indefinitely. There'll be a beautiful trajectory for where to go for some out of the box coaching containers and support if you want to sort of learn. And many people who I find who enjoy this type of work enjoy working with multiple different people at different intervals, different seasons in their life. So it could be that someone listening now might reach out to you in a couple of years. It's a different type of medicine. And we don't really have a name because technically we're not practicing medicine, but it's healing in a different way. And it's been a delight to connect. And We'll look forward to sharing this episode. So good night, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Wells, for being with us.
My pleasure. Good night.